Hello, and welcome to the Whale Hunting Podcast, where we shine a light onto the hidden worlds of money and power. I'm Bradley Hope. I'm speaking to Lionel Barber, the former editor of the Financial Times and author of the new book, Gambling Man. It's a biography of Masayoshi Son, the founder and CEO of SoftBank and one of the world's least well-known but most influential business people. Welcome, Lionel.
It's good to be here, Bradley.
So, Masayoshi Son, maybe not quite a household name, but can you just make your case for why people should know this name or what is important about Masa?
I think he's been one of the most consequential investors in media and, above all, technology over the last 3 decades. Big investor and early investor in Alibaba. That was a 20 million bet, 80 million bet, Alibaba being the huge, gigantic Chinese e-commerce company. And he turned that into more than 100 billion. Right. He was an early investor in Yahoo. We know about WeWork, which blew up spectacularly, the office leasing company. And then he's also been somebody who's run a big mobile phone company in Japan. He bought Sprint in America. So he's been all over the place. He's touched a lot of different people and made a lot of people rich. And I think, lastly, why should we care about him? Because he's one of the richest, if not the richest person in Japan.
I guess in a way, everybody has at some point touched his money. So he's a consequential figure in the world of technology, especially. I think one of the interesting things about this guy is, so I saw him in this conference, the FII, for the first time.
In Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia. And I didn't know much about him at that time. I just knew he was a consequential figure, as you described. But I found him to be sort of off-putting for me in a public speech setting because he was just using the most basic buzzwords over and over again. And I kind of looked around wondering if other people were having the same feeling, like, does the emperor have clothes or not? And so that's why I was especially interested in your book, because I think your conclusion on him is much more nuanced than the showman or whatever. I mean, maybe you could just expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's worth also adding that, of course, he raised $100 billion, a small amount of money, and used that to disrupt Silicon Valley's venture capital industry. I think that Masa is often not taken seriously because his English isn't perfect. I mean, he did spend 6 years as a student in California where he picked it up, but He picks up phrases or describes himself as a Yoda figure from Star Wars or Napoleon. He has all these references which can be very off-putting. I think when you stand back from that, you have to see him as, one, a serious operator of businesses that make real money. So he's not just a flaky gambler, although I call him Gambling Man. And those businesses are, above all, in e-commerce and telecommunications and mobile. Then he's been able to raise billions. I mean, at one point or another, he's controlled more than $1 trillion of assets. He was the richest person in the world for 3 days. Okay, then loses 97% of his wealth, but he comes back, and he's come back 3 times. So you have to sort of give him credit for a certain resilience aside from his wackiness.
But journalistically speaking, when you were you had just left as the editor of the FT. You were looking for a project. How did you end up focusing on this story? What was the opportunity you saw in the storytelling?
There's no Western biography of Masayoshi Son. I'd met him twice when I was editor. Once when he bought ARM, by the way, the very fantastic advanced semiconductor designer company based in Cambridge. He paid $30 billion for that. Back in 2016. I met him then. I met him also in the Sun Valley conference when he was wandering around touting his SoftBank Vision Fund and his $100 billion. And I thought, this guy's interesting. Maybe sometime. And when I was in Japan traveling, and after the Financial Times had been bought by Nikkei, the Nikkei journalists were always saying, or executives saying, Masayoshi Son, mysterious figure. I'd always wanted to write a biography, and I thought, well, maybe I could do that. And also the appeal of, frankly, traveling around the world, going to Silicon Valley, going to Japan, talking to people in the Middle East, and writing a truly global business story.
And what was your sort of preconception that you had at the very beginning of this process? Did you have a hypothesis for where you might end up?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I'm going to have to go in for some serious self-criticism here because, honestly, I think I was susceptible to the stereotype, small Japanese businessman, bit crazy, lost a lot of money. I didn't have any sense of the nuance. It took me several trips to Japan, did, more than 150 people interviewed. I got a much deeper picture. And if I'm honest, Bradley, I don't think I had a real much of an insight when I started.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you were open-minded to explore, based on the interviews and based on the reporting.
Most important quality of a journalist and reporter is to be curious.
Yeah. And maybe talk a little bit more about the struggle, because, when with a book like this, you're not really getting permission to write the book, right? You're just going for it and offering them the opportunity to get on the train. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know you took a trip there and it didn't quite pan out, how difficult this book was as well.
Well, this book is, as you say, was not authorized. SoftBank did not really want me to write the book. I mean, there have been several biographies in Japanese, but these I describe sometimes, they're not all like that, but they're a bit soft and a bit sort of what I call a stenography. So what Masa says is kind of written down, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write an independent biography. So I thought I could leverage my reputation as editor of the Financial Times. I thought it was quite well known, and that didn't really cut much mustard because, they wanted more control and they were a bit skeptical. And is he serious? Is he going to really dig deep? So I think what I decided to do is practice the art of seduction. And second, do my work, do my homework before I really ask them for a proper sit down with Masa. And yes, I did go to Tokyo actually twice, and he said he was too busy. So I had to be patient.
That's actually, there's a lot of journalists in the world that wouldn't be able to proceed beyond that point, going all the way to Japan. I guess when I was starting the book, when I was reading it, I had a few questions in my mind that I wanted answered, which I think you successfully answered. But one of them was, does this guy have any edge? Does he actually have any edge? Or was he was he a pure gambler who got completely lucky at a moment in time? And the question is, if you have an edge, you can keep being successful over time. And so I think that was one question I have for you is, what's your conclusion on, does Masa have any edge?
Yeah, he was early, but not really early on the internet. So he's kind of wandering around Silicon Valley in 1995 when he sets up his first, it's only partially owned venture capital fund. And he hears about Yahoo and he makes the investment. But actually, a lot of the Netscape moment was actually 12 months, 18 months earlier. But the edge, if you like, is that he's persistent and he has a long-term view. So he doesn't just go in and out. He's not a kind of private equity guy who comes in, buys a stake and then flips. So, and then I think he's had a very much deeper understanding of the enduring power of technology, which is, this book is really about the last 30 years in the sense of technology has infused every part of society. And he understood that in conversations with people like Steve Jobs, who he knew at the time in the 90s, and Larry Ellison of Oracle. And I think he's had a deep and profound understanding of the impact of technology. That's his edge, but he really does go with the gut. I mean, that's why he can, meet Adam Newman of WeWork and then stick him with $4.5 billion and then watch it go up in smoke and more.
Yeah. My second question was, when this kind of biography, the hardest part of reporting, in my experience, is the early days. Where does it really begin? How does it all begin? Because your upbringing, your childhood, your first deal, those are the things that really define you. And that's something that you succeeded with for sure. Maybe you could just talk a little bit more about, where does Masa come from, the sort of Korean and Japan, and then also I think the other part is, behind every great fortune there's always a sort of a deal that maybe you don't want everyone to know about. Maybe we could talk about those two things.
When I started the book, I got some very good advice from someone who's not a Masa fan, Mike Moritz, who was the top man at Sequoia for a number of years. And Mike said, go for the formative years. Don't go for the headlines, the blow-ups in the SoftBank Vision Fund. Go for the child of the formative years. And a couple of other people also, Walter Isaacson, who I talked to, who did the great book on Steve Jobs, latterly Elon Musk, also said, find out about what he did during his teen years. And I was lucky. I hired a Japanese researcher to help me read original Japanese texts. And the key point is that Masa is an outsider. He is Korean, third generation. His grandfather came over in 1917 from Korea when Korea was part of the Japanese Empire. And he was in the coal worker and then a farmer. They had a really hard time after the war. They actually went back to Korea. Korea is now a separate country. Japan is on its knees. They come back to Japan. And Masa is actually born in a slum or next to a slum. And his father, who leaves school at 14, he's a bootlegger, and then he goes into gambling, pachinko. There's a great novel about that. So Masa sees that hustle in his early years, but he doesn't want to go that route. So he actually decides that he wants to learn English and go to California. And that he goes when he's 15, 16, goes to high school, speeds through high school, goes to another college, and then Berkeley, where he majors in economics. But actually, he's a businessman. And we should talk about that because I was with his first business partner, Professor Forrest Moser, just a couple of days ago in Berkeley. He's now 95. When I first met him, he was 92. And there's an incredible story about their first product that they built together, which was a speech synthesizer, a chip that would literally you punch in. This is back in 1978. You punch in on some keyboards a word and it'll translate and you can hear the voice. And this speech synthesizer, Masa developed with Moser and some engineers. I also met another engineer, by the way, who's in his late 80s. They were both sources. And anyway, Masa flogs this to Japanese companies, notably Sharp, but he doesn't tell Moser that he's got a load of money while selling it. And he also does it without the permission of National Semiconductor, which was the chip maker. So essentially, Moser claims he was cheated and lied to. So that's the kind of Masa's original sin. We should add for the lawyers that, of course, Masa says it was just a misunderstanding and there was no written contract, et cetera, et cetera.
I guess that in the world of startups, founders, there's a lot of activity that is not considered illegal until a lawsuit is brought up. I think probably that's edgy behavior. Hard to say how far down the road you take that, but it is fascinating. It also just speaks to the absolute drive of this guy to make money, to be successful, whether or not he's disclosing to his partners fairly or not. He really wanted to make a break.
He did, and he wanted to be number one. That's the phrase that comes across time and time again. And, Moser actually described him because this little student comes into his office wearing a suit and tie. Can you imagine, in Berkeley back in 1978? And says, I've heard of you. You're a famous nuclear particle physicist. I've heard about this product. Now I want to sell it. And he's a salesman. And Moser still describes him as a businessman with a capital B who didn't have much understanding of technology, but he knew he wanted to make his first million.
Definitely. And maybe you could shed light a little bit. I love some of the color in the book too, around the Napoleon paintings, the house, the dining room. Maybe you could just give some of your favorite details.
Well, Masa has numerous properties, and he's very sensitive about his privacy, and he also, I made sure that, by the way, I talked to about 15, 16 people who'd actually been to his house in Tokyo, which he uses for the big pitches when he's raising money or handing out $500 million or $1 billion checks to young founders from California. often after only 15 minutes. I mean, it's hilarious. You had one guy from Britain went over expecting 50 million. He was hopeful, and Masa ended up signing a check for 500 million. And how many people do you know who do that? But he has this fascination with Napoleon, and it's not just about their respective sizes. It's also about empire building. And he sees Napoleon as one of the great figures and actually compares himself to Napoleon. But there is a painting which a number of people actually noticed in his house in Tokyo, which features Napoleon with his generals on the retreat from Moscow in 1812, and it's winter, and half Napoleon's army is wiped out. But Masa sees this as a triumphant exposition or presentation of the general who stays behind in winter, and it's an expression of loyalty. But as a couple of businessmen said to me, actually, this is a story of overreach. Napoleon should never have gone to Moscow in winter. So that's the sort of character that Masa is. Overall, his public image is one of modesty, not showiness, but actually in private, when you go in the house, there's he makes a big deal of his art and the history and etc.
And what's he like as a person? I mean, and did you get a sense of what his life is like on a day-to-day basis? Is he constantly firing up the jet, on traveling around the world, or what's it like?
He divides his schedule into 5-minute blocks. So I guess I was very lucky when I sat down for him with over 2 hours in the first interview. He's always on the move. He has a private jet, at least one, and he's prepared to at the drop of a hat, go on a trip. I mean, he'll literally, I recount, he goes to Omaha to Nebraska to see Warren Buffett in the hope that Buffett will invest in his vision fund. Actually, he doesn't. But I mean, for a sort of 40-minute meeting, go from Tokyo to Nebraska, that's the way he operates. So it's all a bit frenetic. He doesn't sleep that much. He's maybe 4 or 5 hours max. During COVID, he's a painter. He paints. Actually, he showed me his paintings, quite good. A bit in the Van Gogh style, if I could put it that way. Late 19th century French impressionists. So there is an artistic streak as well. But overall, I would say, look, he's very wary of foreigners. He's wary of strangers. He's fiercely protective of his privacy. And he's absolutely geared to making money and very transactional.
Is it clear at all where he kind of gets his information? How does he absorb and come to these predictions?
He is not a great reader of books, although I hope that he'll make time, and I'm told he is making some time to read Gambling Man. My impression, and based on interviews, is that he gets his information from his network. So he's constantly on email. He's talks to people. That's where he gets his information. He's not a big book reader.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to my third question, because of my own experience covering SoftBank. I kind of interacted with the story of some of the staff that were far afield from the central office and some of the antics they got up to. But it made me wonder, what is his sort of philosophy around people? Because these guys are all, crazy gamblers and perhaps not even the best people that you could find to do the job. Yet he could probably hire the best people if he wanted to. So I was curious also about, there's kind of the inner sanctum team, and then there's this kind of far-flung group. And did you come to some conclusions about that as well?
Yeah, I asked people about that because I think to write a good book, you have to understand the company culture and the psychology and the managerial strengths and weaknesses. And one person, it was Joe Tsai, described how Masa is different from Jack Ma in the sense that Ma is Jack Ma being the co-founder of Alibaba. He's a team manager. He likes people. He likes working with people. Whereas Masa is much more transactionary, even as one of his top people described, mercenary. And so he really only cared. He never asked questions about how the family is, for example, even of his closest people. But there is a division, third point, between the kind of Praetorian Guard, the samurai court in Tokyo, the Japanese top people, who I met, some of whom I met, but not all of them. I mean, because it's really around Masa. But there's them, and they're fiercely loyal. They don't really challenge him, very, very rarely. And then there's these outsiders, these hired guns, like Rajiv Misra, the Indian Deutsche Bank credit trader who ran the Vision Fund, or Marcelo Clary, the Bolivian American who ran Sprint. And these people really are, I mean, they would like, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, think of that, and then multiply it by 10.
And what about some of these big bets like the Vision Fund? Have we come to a conclusion now about, did that work? I mean, I'm sure there's numbers they would put forward to say X, Y, and Z, but what do you think?
I think it was very mediocre performance, mainly because everything was done in a total rush, and they wasted money. I mean, Masa likes to cover every sort of space on the board. That's his approach to investing, and something will come good. He does a lot on the gut. If you look at the Vision Fund's performance now, based on calculations, you'd say maybe it's high single digits. But of course, remember, Masa agreed to pay a coupon of 7% to the chief investors, the leading partners like the Saudis, the PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, or also the Emiratis, their stake. I mean, those two put up 60 billion, 45 billion being the Saudis. So I think overall it wasn't a nothing burger, but it was sort of very average. The second Vision Fund, he couldn't get outside investment, and that really went into a sea of red ink. Some of these, I mean, remember, just last point, he still has stakes in 500 companies, and some of those are actually doing much better now.
Makes sense. I think one of the other things that he was always famous for was believing in the coming singularity, and some of these kind of, I guess you would call them like philosophical predictions. And that's what I heard him speak about at the FII in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the AI revolution is now unleashed. He's not really at the forefront of that, but he managed to sneak in 500 million into the OpenAI recent round. I mean, do you think, is he positioned well to benefit from the AI revolution, or is he kind of trailing?
Well, a word on singularity, because that's that moment where robots in effect become more intelligent than humans. And Masa's been talking about that for 25 years. He's also been talking to his close friends that because of AI and singularity, he's actually going to be able to live to 120 or 130. Just letting you know, so this book should last. But on the AI stuff, I mean, I asked a couple of his top people, and their comment was he was in such a rush that he didn't sufficiently discriminate between companies that were touting themselves as AI, but it's a bit like the .com moniker, where, just put we're in AI, and he'd sign the check. But actually there were companies into deep AI, which he missed. And remember, he did sell out of NVIDIA, the advanced computer graphics company, computer chip company, which is now worth more than $3 trillion. He sold a 5% stake in 2019, made a decent return on his stake, but what that would have been worth now, worth thinking about. So I would say he's late to the party, a bit later than he was to the internet party, but he's there. He's present at the table. And as you say, quite an important investment, albeit at a high price, into OpenAI, which is one of the very hot companies because of its ChatGPT application.
Yeah. So, at this point in time, though, do you see him as a big figure we're going to be hearing about for the next 10 years? Or is he struggling to get back at the table after some of these more middling performances and maybe sort of missing the AI boat so far?
I'm going to stick my neck out and say that he is going to be still a big figure in the next 10 years. He's got at least $30 billion of firepower because he's reduced the debts at SoftBank. And some of these bets, like, ARM, he paid $30 billion. It's now worth more than $100 billion. So that's been a good one. And I think some of his AI bets will come good. So he won't be as big as, shall we say, Mark Zuckerberg, or, I mean, he's going to hate me for saying that, but, or Larry Ellison. He's not an innovator. He's doesn't own proprietary technology, but he's got firepower and he's made a lot of bets, and some of them are going to come good.
Excellent. Well, it'll be very exciting to watch, and congratulations on an excellent book as well.
Thank you very much, Bradley. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and I should also tell everybody that Bradley's been an excellent observer and guide. All authors need guides, even editors.
Thank you very much. That's it for this week. Thank you to Lionel for joining us. Gambling a Man is available at all good bookshops here in the UK and is available for pre-order in the US right now. If you're enjoying the Whale Hunting podcast, make sure to check out the newsletter at whalehunting.projectbrazen.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week for more.
Whale Hunting is a production of Project Brazen. It's hosted by me, Tom Wright, and Bradley Hope. It's produced by Megan Dean, Claire Urban, and Arnav Binaikia. At Project Brazen, Mariangel Gonzalez is our project manager, and Charlie Barlow is associate producer. Ryan Ho is the creative director, with additional design from Andrea Claridge.